get that.
Well, first and foremost, thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that you're going to find some tremendous value in the conversation. We encourage people to use the question and answers so we can make this a far more interactive. My name is Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Keller Williams Vermont Strongwell Real Estate, as well as I'm an owner of Strongwell Property Management. Today, we have the esteemed, the appreciated, the sought after Angela Zaikowski of the Vermont Landlord Association. I will tell you, one of the best things I ever did as an investor was join the Vermont Landlord Association, be it from format or, or for legal assistance, forms, so forth and so on. And then we also have a good friend of mine, as well as fellow licensed real estate broker, Michael Alberston. He's with Burlington Housing, Authority, and he's going to be talking to us today. I started by saying free money, but apparently it's not free. It's almost guaranteed.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was such a gracious introduction. Thank you.
So, Michael, I think we'll mostly turn this over to you. You're the new landlord advocate at Burlington Housing Authority. So maybe it makes sense to describe for folks who are on what that position is and what your role is and how you're there to assist.
Sure. Well, essentially, up to this point, there was no landlord advocate here at Burlington Housing Authority. And the new executive director, as well as my boss, Stephanie Bixby, really felt strongly that they needed a landlord advocate on the team because, frankly, the landlords' voices were not being heard, and the landlords are the housing providers. We can't do our job without you folks, the landlords. So we came to the conclusion that we really needed to do something far more aggressively as far as trying to involve landlords, getting information out to landlords, et cetera. And that's how my position got created. I was hired away from Brian's team at Keller Williams by Burlington Housing Authority. Brian was very gracious about losing me. And since I've been here now about 3 or 4 months, and the beginning of what I'm trying to do is what we're doing here today, is just introducing myself to the landlord community, talking about the various programs that we have available for landlords to help them run their properties, manage their properties in a profitable manner, and also to try to increase the availability of affordable housing in the Burlington market. As all of us here know, affordable housing is in a crisis situation. Rents have skyrocketed, and we are trying to rebuild that affordable rental housing base. And we're going to be doing it through some of the programs that we're going to be talking about here today.
If I may interject, to anybody who's listening and has had questions or concerns about working with Section 8 in Burlington Housing, one is, I think it's a compliment to the organization, and it's a compliment to the, to the mission to provide us a landlord advocate so that we're better heard. I've worked with various housing agencies now for just under 30 years, and a vast majority of the tenants I've worked with are wonderful individuals that make me very, very happy that we have such a program. Yes, we see some occasional challenge, but we do that with everybody.
And so, Michael, maybe you can describe for folks what programs the Burlington Housing Authority does offer for landlords.
Sure. I'll start with the Guaranteed Rent Program, because that seems to be the most popular item on the agenda. And essentially, when we talk about the Guaranteed Rent Program, if a landlord is willing to not accept, all they have to do is be willing to consider a Section 8 housing voucher. If they just tell me that, okay, I'm willing to consider them, then we get them on our Landlord Advantage program. We will then send them eligible folks that meet the criteria. It is up to the landlord to choose whether they want to enter into a business relationship with that individual. And I want to emphasize, because this is very important, it's your property, not ours. It's your choice, not ours. The landlord always is the person in control. So you are under no obligation to accept anyone that we refer to you. You should go through your same normal process. Whatever background checks you usually do, whatever criminal checks you usually do, I encourage you to do all of that with any of our clients the way you would with anyone else. Treat them no differently. Now, if you should just decide at that point that you want to use a family that holds a Section 8 voucher, that's great. You let us know. We take care of all the paperwork that is required from HUD. You can use your lease, or you can use one of our leases. Again, completely up to the landlord. At that point, the property is then inspected. If it passes inspection, and if when we crunch the numbers, the apartment comes out as affordable. And we have a whole slate of prices, which I'll talk about in a little bit to give people an idea what the vouchers are. Once our team decides that it is affordable and that the tenant will qualify for that property, then you sign what's known as a HAP contract. The HAP contract is your guarantee of payment. The payment is not guaranteed by Burlington Housing Authority. We are a creation of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're HUD. We are the ones that distribute the money to Burlington and the general metropolitan area for people that are accepting Section 8 housing vouchers. Okay, so we distribute the money. The contract is funded through Congress. So when we say guaranteed, it is guaranteed. The only time, and I have to be honest about this, the only time there would be a problem is that if Congress does not pass a budget, which happens about once every decade or so. People are fighting, the budget doesn't get passed on time, but eventually it always gets passed and the money always gets distributed. So the guarantee is your HAP contract, and that pretty much is the guarantee right there. Now, how much is that guarantee? That depends both on the rent that's being charged by the landlord, as well as the financial situation of the family. Some of our families have zero income and we cover almost all of the rent. Some of our families are working poor that are able to pay a percentage of the rent. The percentage of the rent that we are responsible for is the part that's guaranteed. So for example, I'm just picking numbers out of the sky. The rent's $1,000. We are picking up $800 of that because it's a working family that can afford to pay for some of that rent. If for whatever reason that family stops paying rent, we will still continue to pay that $800. That's what part that's guaranteed. Now, if the family is going to be evicted because they've somehow broken the lease with the landlord, we will pay up to that eviction for the family, and then the family leaves. So the guarantee is for our portion of the rent, and I want to be very specific here. We do sometimes cover all of the rent, but again, it depends on the financial formula that we get from HUD that we have to use. There's no wiggle room at all. That tells us the percentage of the rent that then is guaranteed by BHA. Now, in general, we don't have a problem with rents getting paid, because if we're paying 60%, 70%, 80% of the rent, well, usually the tenant has no trouble making up the difference. But like tenants who, are not part of our program, or just like some college kids you might rent to here in Burlington, there's always the chance that someone might not pay rent. There's always the chance that someone might hurt the property. That's no different from anyone else. So when we say we guarantee pay the rent, that's what I'm speaking about there. And I'm happy to, by the way, to be interrupted to answer questions about any of what we're talking about.
Sure. Michael, can you maybe speak a little bit to, there are some events that could cause the HAP contract to be terminated earlier, right? There are things that will cause that to go away, even without an eviction, or
well, if the tenant should fall out of compliance with our program, mm-hmm. You're right. At that point, we would alert the landlord that this person is no longer in compliance. And if they choose to keep the person, then their subsidy is going to be ending. But that is something that we would inform the landlord about ahead of time, because there is a whole slew of other issues that the tenant has to be in compliance with us about. For example, reporting their changes in their income. We check income annually on the anniversary of a lease for a tenant. If a tenant does, for whatever reason, it's not told us that, let's say they've received a new job and it's changed their income, they're trying to hide income, etc., then that would be something that we would tell them, you're out of compliance, you have to get back to compliance. And if you don't get back to compliance, you're going to lose your subsidy. There's also some criminal situations where that would take place as well.
Okay. And I think, stepping back, one of the things that I hear a lot from landlords is they're going to inspect my property and I'm going to have thousands and thousands of dollars of things that I'm going to have to repair. If you're able, could you speak a little bit to the housing quality standards, or the HQS standards, which is what you're inspecting to for Correct. These programs?
Right. And those standards are federal standards. But one thing that's important to note, when we inspect a landlord's property prior to a tenant moving in, okay, we're expecting for our standards, number one. It's not the city of Burlington. It's not the electrical code. It's not the National Fire Code. So it's strictly for our standards. And frankly, you know, our standards are a little bit looser than what those other things I'm quoting, because we want that person to be able to get into the property. We want to be able to work with that landlord. Now, if we do find some deficiencies, well, hopefully they're the easy ones, like, oh, that smoke detector wasn't working. Or, oh, you know, we have a problem with the sink. So it's not thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. What we do is we then inform the landlord, okay, these are the deficiencies that need to be corrected. We also inform the potential tenant of that. But that's all. We don't inform the city. We're not some reporting agency that's going to run around and try to get people losing their occupancy licenses. We're not in that business. We're simply in the business to see that it is safe housing for our potential tenants. Right. And we do give landlords time to get into compliance if they choose. But again, they're under no obligation to get into compliance. If after the inspection they go, I just don't want to make these repairs, their property, their choice. At that point, we simply tell our tenant that, well, you know, they're not going to be in compliance, and we move on and try to find other housing for that person.
You know, as a comment, Mike, my history of dealing with Section 8, and thankfully to Dan Hogan, our property manager, he's the far more hands-on. But when I was a hands-on manager, I found everything you guys requested pretty much made sense. The other thing I found as well, you know, is that if the timing wasn't ideal, that more often than not with communication, you guys were reasonable. If it was not a life-threatening, you know, violation, to work with us for time, for extensions. One of the questions come to mind is, how can you help landlords when they have some troubled tenants, either tenants that aren't making their payments to you, or in cases where we have hoarders? Mm-hmm. What can Burlington Housing do to help a landlord who's after this not free, but almost guaranteed money?
Well, we have a specific group of folks here. We call it the retention team, and their job specifically is if there's conflict of any kind between a landlord and a tenant. And as you say, if it's a rent conflict, if it's a noise conflict, often it's simply personality conflicts where some people just don't know how to deal with each other. We have a team of trained retention specialists that will intervene in the situation and try to resolve things to everyone's benefit. Now, of course, that doesn't work with all human beings, but we've found that often the conflicts are ones of misunderstanding more so than specific things. You know, a landlord might tell a tenant they need to do A, B, C, and D. For example, oh, you can't have your bicycle in the hallway, which is a reasonable request on the part of a landlord. The tenant might say, they told me I can't have a bicycle. That's what the tenant heard, even though that's not what the landlord meant. So our retention team will be there to try to make sure that everyone's speaking the same language and to see what are problems that are real problems that need to be solved and ones that might just be somebody just had a bad day. But again, the point is to work with all sides to resolve these kind of issues as quickly, simply, and easily as possible. And again, there's absolutely no cost to the landlord for this. You know, if a landlord calls us and says, I'm having a lot of trouble with person A, B, C, they've done this, this, and this, you know, we will immediately talk to that tenant, find out the story from their side, and get the parties together and try to mediate a reasonable solution that's a win-win for everyone. Because once again, without you folks that are housing providers, we don't have anywhere to put people. So we're always going to be trying to work as hard as possible with landlords to try to make things work out, because we want them to work for you, because when it works for the landlords, it works for us and it works for the tenant. And that's the goal here.
And I'm just going to jump in, Brian, and just remind folks, and Michael, it might be good information for you to have as well, is that the Landlords Association is currently running the landlord tenant mediation program, which any of the Section 8 tenants, program tenants, would qualify for. And what that program does is pays for a professional mediator, so somebody who does this as their job, to offer mediation services for landlords and tenants to try to resolve disputes. And there doesn't have to be a pending eviction case or a termination notice. Like, it's intended to help retain housing. and it's going to be going till 2025. So
excellent.
Well, Angela, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the important thing that you did say is simply that it's important to do it quickly at the beginning of the process. I really urge landlords out there, if you feel at all like there's a problem or a potential problem, don't wait for it to manifest itself. Don't wait for it to get to the point where you're angry. Let us know at the very beginning of the process that you feel that there might be a problem coming up, because the earlier that we can jump on the problem, as well as the earlier that you folks at the association can jump on the problem, that's when the resolutions are the easiest, the least costly, and you can avoid so much antagonism and anger. And again, so much of it is just people not communicating clearly with each other.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have the guaranteed rent program. Are there other programs that are available for landlords?
Well, I wanted to let everybody know that recently our voucher payment standards have increased. So just so folks know, efficiency, we are now reimbursing up to $1,200 a month on an efficiency. On a 1-bedroom, it's $1,396. On a 2-bedroom, it's $1,800. On a 3-bedroom, it's $2,225. And by the way, folks, all you have to do is call me and I'll be happy to send these numbers out to everyone. A 4-bedroom is $2,421. A 5 is $2,807. And a 6 is now $3,173. On average, that's about a 9% increase across the board in most cases. And so those are our most recent rate increases. And although rents in Burlington have skyrocketed, as we all know, this is pulling us a little bit closer and getting us a little bit closer to the market rates.
There's a phenomenal opportunity in there. Years ago, I bought a building with an elderly resident, been there a long time, excellent resident. And they were probably paying 50% below market rent. And, we needed to bring the property up to market rent to get a return on our investment. And we were concerned about having to ask this person to leave because, again, we knew they were elderly. We knew they were, had been a wonderful resident. By working with Burlington Housing, we were actually able to almost double the rent, and their rent only went up $25. So we were able to get a good return on our investment, provide value to an appreciated, resident, and it was a win-win-win by working with your department.
Right. And again, I want to emphasize, people need to call us when you think you might want to raise the rent. Let us know, and we can tell you whether you'll go outside of affordability or not. We can tell you how much you can raise the rent before that would happen. And then we can figure out if there needs to be an increase to the tenant, what that would be, which is exactly the situation that Brian just described. So again, early communication makes everyone's life easier. And frankly, from the landlord perspective, will also make your life more profitable.
And so, Michael, I think you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about the earlier program with landlords need to screen and do sort of their normal processes for applicants in this program. But does the Housing Authority, as a part of their application, when tenants are coming in and getting approved for a voucher, is there any form of background checks or other sort of criminal checks or anything that the Housing Authority themselves is doing as they're approving tenants for the voucher program?
Okay, the only thing we do is approve them for the program in the sense of making sure that they financially are eligible. And we do, in some cases, do background checks as far as criminality, but that depends from situation to situation. So that's why I urge landlords to always do themselves. Don't assume that because someone has a Section 8 voucher that they're going to be an angel, because just like everyone else in society, humans are humans. We can't control people just as you can't control people.
Right.
So the best defense is a solid, good, aggressive background check, running a criminal check on people, et cetera, because it's your property, it's your choice.
Okay. And so it sounds like the main role of the Housing Authority as they're allowing tenants into the program and issuing them vouchers is income verification. You're confirming income, sources of income, amounts of income, to ensure compliance with your program, and the other types of screenings are for the landlord to be doing before they approve someone.
Yes, essentially that is correct. We also, we're also checking to make sure when someone says they have 8 children that these children really exist, because we have a point system as far as what people pay. So for example, if you are elderly and disabled, well, you're going to move higher on our list than if you're a single 25-year-old male, et cetera, et cetera. So we do all of that type of stuff. So once we send someone out with a voucher, a landlord can be assured that, number one, that the client meets the criteria, our criteria, and number two, if they choose that client, yes, we will pay.
Okay.
Now, another program that we have running is, and I know some of the Burlington landlords might be aware of this, is the short-term rental change in regulations here in Burlington. And what the new regulations are saying is that if in an owner-occupied property, you want to rent one of your units in a multi-unit property to the short-term rental market, in other words, Airbnb, you need to now make one other unit in that property affordable. The easiest way to make that other unit affordable is simply let us know that you're willing to accept a Section 8 voucher, because then we would check the rent you want to charge, et cetera. And if it's going to be affordable, then we give you that designation that's affordable, which is then going to be okay with the city. And therefore, you can then rent one of those units as short-term rental. Now, I know I've talked to some landlords who've been, yeah, but if I'm willing to accept a slightly lower rent for a Section 8 person, well, I'm not making as much money. Well, if you're renting one other unit to the Airbnb market, you should be able to make up that difference in just a couple of months.
Great point.
And then even more. So it actually is a great deal for everyone because it brings an affordable unit onto the market. At the same time, the landlord can take another unit and more profitably rent that to the short-term market. So the landlord will come out ahead as long as they're charging a good, solid, sellable price for their Airbnb unit. So if anybody wants to do that, they just have to call me. I'll explain the steps they have to go through. It is the City of Burlington's program, but we will be the ones that would supply the affordable housing designation and therefore the Section 8 tenant if the landlord should decide to go in that direction. And again, contact me and I can tell them all the steps they have to go through with the City of Burlington to get the proper designation, and then we would get the Section 8 person in there so they can then do the short-term rentals.
And this is something that's only available for owner-occupied multi-unit buildings?
That is my current understanding, but the city is still in the process of writing regulations because the process, the program started on August 3rd. Why should we have regulations yet? So they're still in the process of writing those regs. My understanding, though, is that it has to be an owner-occupied building. But again, I haven't seen the final regulations. That's what it looked like the original thing, the original draft that was, done by the city council. That was there. I'm waiting to see the final regs from the city, but I'm sure they'll be there in one form or another.
But sort of regardless how those regulations sort of shake out when they're finalized, this program can offer that affordability designation to get folks into the program if their building qualifies.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And again, any confusion, and there is still a lot of confusion about this, call me. Right now I have a list of landlords that have called and said that they would accept a Section 8 person, as they work with the city to get their designation. So we're ready to send out people as soon as someone says, yes, I've registered with the city. I'm going to do an Airbnb. I'm going to make one of my units affordable. Send me people. And we'll literally be letting people know that day.
Okay. And what's the, I hear a lot, there's no place to go. We can't find places. What are you seeing in terms of your ability to help place tenants, availability of affordable units? What is the market doing? What are you seeing the market do out there?
Well, it's really tough right now. It's really tough. We're below 2% on the vacancy rate. There is a lot of, for lack of a better term, gentrification going on. A lot of landlords in Burlington are pulling units off the market. They're rehabbing them and therefore raising rent, and they're no longer affordable. So one of the reasons that we've developed some of these programs that we're talking about here today is to entice landlords to keep their units affordable in exchange for the guaranteed rent and some of the other programs and such that we're doing. But it is a tough road to hoe right now. There's, you know, it's a tight market. We have lots of people out there with vouchers that have expired. And by that, I mean, once a voucher is issued, they have 60 days to find a place. If they cannot find a place in 60 days, that voucher expires. They do go back on the list, but they, you know, go back on down the list, and then the process starts over again. And right now we have a lot of expiring vouchers because, frankly, there is not enough affordable housing, you know, here in the Burlington metropolitan area. There's not, and, you know, that's not just a function of rents. That's also a function of the lack of building, how hard it is to build affordable housing in this area, as well as just the general rise in prices, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, it seems like we're in a perfect storm that is making it extremely hard on, you know, on working class folks to find affordable housing. So we're redoubling our efforts here. And it's one of the reasons, frankly, that I'm here talking to you folks today.
And Michael, just so folks are aware, Burlington Housing Authority can write vouchers for properties outside of the city of Burlington.
That is correct. We also cover Shelburne, South Burlington, Colchester, Winooski, and Williston.
Okay, so quite a bit more jurisdictions and cities than just Burlington. So if you have properties outside of Burlington, these are programs that also you could potentially qualify for.
The only program that doesn't work outside of Burlington is the short-term rental. That is strictly a Burlington regulation.
Okay.
Mike, what are you seeing for time frames of people to get onto a voucher system? Because like one of the examples, you know, I was aware of a property that was under contract. Tenant, you know, was refusing to leave. They hadn't paid in a long time. And yet from everything that we could see is this person would be an excellent candidate, you know, for Burlington Housing or Section 8. How long does it take to get somebody on so that we could potentially help landlords out there or investors find win-win as they run into these problems where people aren't paying their rents and they weren't previously on Section 8?
Well, getting someone qualified for Section 8 is the shortest and easiest part of the problem. If they're income eligible and, you know, they meet the other various criteria, they go on the list. The challenge there is that sometimes the list is 3, sometimes 4, and in some cases 5-year wait. And that's because of the housing situation here in Burlington. Now, for some people, it's shorter because it's done on a point system. If you are elderly and you are disabled and you have no income and you are homeless, well, you get a number of points from HUD, so you can move very close to the top of that list. As I was saying earlier, you know, if the person you're talking about, Brian, I'm just giving an example, is 25 years old, jobless, but does have a place to live, they're not going to get very high on the list because they're just not that vulnerable population. Now, to talk specifically about someone who might be in a unit, let's take you as an example. They're in one of your units. They're having trouble paying rent. You contact Burlington Housing Authority on their behalf, or they contact us. Sure, we'll income verify them. We'll take a look at the situation. Now, in some cases, that person might qualify to be given emergency status. For example, if their only result would be an eviction would be homelessness, and again, there might be elderly, et cetera, then we might do what we call a lease up in place. We would issue them a voucher that would be good for the property they're at right now. But the problem is I can't give you an answer on the criteria of that because there are so many moving elements between rent, income, family status. Are we talking about a single person? Or are we talking about a woman who has 4 children? You know, are we talking about a situation where a person might have been battered by a spouse? You know, all of that plays into the formula for where someone lands on the list. how much their subsidies would be, and how quickly we could get them housed. So that's another reason why, if any landlords out there think they might be facing that situation, sooner rather than later, get in touch with us so we can get the process started, so we can let them know that, okay, you don't have to evict this person because we are willing to pick up this percentage of the rent, or it might be, we're sorry, they do not qualify and there's nothing we can do.
Do you help coordinate any outreaches to like CVEO? So if somebody's eligible for your program, but they don't have a deposit, do you help field those resources as well?
No, we do not handle that, but there are plenty of programs, and CVEO, as you said it right there, they're a place to go that would help fund deposits. There's several other organizations that would. And if someone came to us and asked, we would give them the list and say, okay, these are the 4 organizations in Burlington you can go to that might be able to fund your deposit.
Excellent.
And so, Michael, talking about specifically if you have a tenant who's participating in the program, landlord's participating in the program, tenant starts having trouble paying their portion of the rent for whatever reason, does this particular program or these programs allow an interim adjustment for rent? So if the tenant's income has changed, maybe they lost a job or hours were cut or some sort of benefit was cut, are they able to get a readjustment on their portion mid-lease?
Well, it's a great question. If, for example, a tenant loses their job through no fault of their own, we might pick up the remainder of the contract, the whole rent. Again, it depends on the specific situation. But so instead of doing, would not do an adjustment. We would not say to the landlord, you have to lower the rent. We would not ask that.
Right,
we would cover the difference.
Right, that's what I meant. If there would be an adjustment in what the portion the tenant was responsible for if the tenant's circumstances changed.
Yes. But again, it depends on if the tenant was laid off because we're coming into a recession, and economics is slowing down, so they got laid off from their job. Yes, we would step in and handle that adjustment. If, on the other hand, the tenant lost their job because they stabbed their boss, we would not be as inclined to help out in that situation. So again, every situation is different, but assuming that it was something someone lost their job, no fault of their own, or here's an example that happened very recently. A tenant had a very bad auto accident. Not their fault. They were in a bad auto accident. They couldn't work for 3 months. We picked up the remainder of the rent for those 3 months till they could get back to work.
But this again gets back to that communication piece and landlords being proactive when they see an issue, reaching out directly to the program, communicating with the tenant about it, offering solutions versus just getting upset because the rent's not getting paid.
Right. And I would really urge everyone out there, call me before the rent gets, too far in arrears if you're concerned about anything, because that way we can jump in again at an early stage and try to alleviate things, before the tenant is $4,000 in debt, and then they would be looking to VRAP, which isn't going to exist very soon, and other places that don't have the money right now. If we can jump on it early, even if we can't solve the problem, at least the landlord knows that we can't solve the problem, and he or she then can make the plans that they feel are necessary.
And what type of units are you seeing the biggest need for in terms of number of bedrooms,
2 and 3
location?
bedrooms.
Okay, 2 and 3 bedrooms.
2 and 3 bedrooms, because there's so many families. The vast majority of our clients are single women with multiple children. If I was going to give a snapshot, that's what the majority of them are. And frankly, single women with multiple children tend to be very good tenants. They understand they can't afford to lose the place. They tend to stay in compliance. They're frankly the easiest ones for us to deal with because they're highly motivated to maintain a stable home life. So they're really dedicated to the kids and dedicated to themselves. So I would say that's the most stable of our clients, and that's also what the vast majority of them are.
And does a housing authority have any sort of risk pools or other resources if, say, a landlord's unit gets damaged during the course of a tenancy, and if damage exceeds a deposit, or there's other issues like that?
We do not have a mitigation fund of that type, but the state does. And we are happy to help any landlord out as far as if they feel that that is the case is what you just described. We're happy to help anyone out as far as documenting it and helping them get those funds from the state. Because frankly, if one of our people is in your property and they damage your property and you feel that you have to move to eviction, and if we look at the situation and go, yeah, this person did violate our terms of agreement, so we're not going to stand in the way of any eviction, the first thing we want to do is help you get a better Section 8 tenant in there. And part of the way to do that is to help you get that mitigation fund money, get the repairs done, make sure the landlord is happy and satisfied, because frankly, it just makes it easier to say yes to the next person we propose. So again, we want to try to make this a long-term relationship with landlords, and we'll do everything we can within the law and within what our charge from the federal government is to make that happen, make that as smooth as possible. And again, I keep saying this, but I want to emphasize it. Call me. I know that in the past, sometimes landlords have called BHA and gotten the runaround because people don't know who to talk to, and it can be very confusing because titles don't always represent exactly what people do. There hasn't been a landlord advocate here in the past to say, wait a second, this landlord needs this, it's reasonable, we need to do this. You know, now that I'm here, if you're not sure who to call me. If I'm not responsible for whatever the situation is, I will get you to the responsible party.
You know, Mike, one of the questions that occasionally runs into is if we suspect criminal activity and we have a Section 8 recipient under your program, how, in addition to bringing in law enforcement about our concerns, how could Section 8 of Burlington Housing potentially help?
Well, that's our retention team again. If you feel that, okay, I think criminal activity is taking place, number one, you know, let us know that. Number two, let the police know. We can do very little without a police report. Okay, we need that police report to say to the tenant, we now have an official report that you may be or you are alleged to be involved in A, B, and C acts. These violate our program, these violate our lease, you're setting yourself up for a potential eviction, and then talking to, counseling, and working with that tenant to try to alleviate that situation, and with the landlord. But I urge landlords, again, it's your property. If you feel there's illegal activity happening, call the police. Then let us know. But call the police first. That way we can then go to the police. And we've had a similar situation in Winooski literally just a couple of weeks ago. I can't go into the details specifically, but the situation was a woman was getting abused, and the landlord let us know, which then gave us a reason to talk to the person, even though she didn't report it herself. Once we spoke with her, she decided to report it to the police. And now the process is happening where the person that attacked her is in the process of eviction. And we're getting that person out of the building. Now, the interesting thing is, the person that was attacked is one of our clients. The person that did the attacking is not. But yet, because of that police report, we were able to move to get that person, to try to get that person out of the building. So again, we're not law enforcement, which is why landlords need to report to the police first. Once we have the police report, then we can act.
Love to remind everybody, feel free to put your questions in the question and answer session. Angela and I clearly have a ton of them ourselves. And Mike, you've been very, very gracious in answering them, but want to make sure we make this as inclusive and as value packed as possible. So please ask any questions if you have them.
And I think, Mike, following up on sort of this line of discussion, I know some landlords are nervous or concerned about reaching out to Burlington Housing when they have these types of issues, because their sense is that it's going to cause the tenant's voucher to get terminated. And so, sometimes they're not willing to take that step because they don't want to be in the jam of having an issue and not having money come in. And are you able to speak to that, or maybe give a little more reassurances for whether or not something like that would cause a tenant's voucher to get terminated while they're still living at the property?
Well, again, it depends from situation to situation. So it's a kind of tough one to answer. If someone is involved in serious criminal activity, well, that's a pretty cut and dried situation. And even if the landlord is concerned that someone's voucher is going to get pulled, number one, we don't want to do that. Okay. We do everything we can not to do that. We're in the business of getting people housed and getting landlords paid, not in the getting people evicted and not paying landlords. So we'll do everything we can to see that that doesn't happen. But is there a circumstance where someone is in violation of our program that we might have to do that? Yes. But I would urge landlords to think about it this way. If they're in violation of our program, they're in violation of their lease, most likely. So if they're in violation of the landlord's lease, how badly do you still want that tenant? So it's a balancing act, I understand, for the landlord to make that decision. It's their decision to make, but I would urge them, even if they just want to have an off-the-record conversation with me and say, gee, Mike, here's the situation. What do you think? Again, call, communicate. We're not the police. We're not looking to make the landlord the bad guy or the tenant the bad guy. We're interested in helping everyone to work harmoniously together as much as possible, because we like giving out money. We want to give out money. We want to give money to landlords. We, frankly, have more vouchers that can be filled than can be filled right now. In other words, that's another way of saying we have more money to spend that right now we can't spend. So we'd like to.
Okay. And I saw that we had a question flash up about the VRAP program. Folks, VRAP is ending. They're going to stop taking applications October 1st. Anybody who is receiving a subsidy, such as a Section 8 voucher, who's receiving assistance is going to lose. That VRAP support is going to end for that population, I believe October 1st as well. So there's a few programs that are going to continue. Most of them are not going to impact the Section 8 population because of these new changes. So VRAP is going to be coming off the table for a lot of these conversations.
Right, but important to point out that doesn't affect their Section 8 voucher.
Right.
They still have that Section 8 voucher. We will continue to pay the portion of the rent that we were paying. And if the end of VRAP should have a significant economic impact on that tenant, we will reevaluate the rate that we're paying, and we might pick up more of their rent.
Right.
But again, if you have a Section 8 tenant in there now and VRAP is ending, it's not going to affect the payments that we're currently making, and it might even increase our payments depending on the circumstance.
Right. And I think, we haven't touched on this, we've sort of alluded to it, but when calculations are being made, tenants who are participating in the Section 8 program are paying no more than 30% of their income towards their rent. And so that's part of the calculation on what the tenant portion is of the rent. And so if they're struggling to pay their tenant portion because their income's changed, they may need to have their income reevaluated and have those proportions changed.
Yes, and when someone has a significant change in income, we do exactly that. We relook at the situation, and in any case, all tenants are reevaluated on an annual basis. So if their income should change either up or down, that is recalculated, and then our portion of the rent will be recalculated.
Right. So there are controls within the program itself for those income changes, but the tenant and the landlord have to, and particularly the tenant, they have to take advantage of that and seek that out or have somebody help them with that process.
Yes, but because we do annual reevaluations, we require them to tell us, have you had a change in income? Have you had a change in your job situation? Have your hours on the job been cut from 40 to 30? Or do you have a new job that now pays you 30% more than what it did in the past? So we are on top of that on an annual basis. If someone should have a significant change during the year when before the annual comes up, we will look at it then. But usually that is the case where someone has something somewhat catastrophic happen. I lost my job. I was injured and I can't work. My boss significantly cut my hours. So in those cases, we'll look at it, in the middle of the year if necessary to readjust.
Yeah. So we had a question that came in that if a tenant's evicted for a lease or some sort of voucher violation, would that cause them to lose that Section 8 voucher and not be able to move it to another property? And then if they're not losing it, why are they not?
Well, if they're out of compliance on our program and they do not get themselves back into compliance, they will lose their voucher.
We had another one as well regarding what happens when a building's sold with Section 8 vouchers, how to communicate that, how to operate that, so landlord B can pick up the voucher from landlord A.
Well, on the assumption that the person we're talking about that has the voucher is on a lease, it's the same as it would be on any real estate deal. If you buy a 3-family that 2 of the people in there have leases, well, as landlord, you have to maintain those leases. It would be the exact same situation here. Those leases would have to be maintained, and then at the time of renewal, can be renegotiated.
Yep. And there's a little bit of paperwork that the purchasing owner has to fill out to get those payments transferred over.
Right. I'm a listing agent. I don't work on the buy side.
So we had a question from David Cook, and David, thanks for attending today. I have a duplex in South Burlington. My son is renting one unit using VRAP funds, which are expiring. Can Section 8 potentially fill the gap?
When you say your son is renting, do you mean he is the rentee, or is he living in one unit and renting the other?
As I understand it from the reading, his son is renting the unit as the tenant. And Mr. Cook, please feel free to type in the answer if I had, or to type in the chat if I had that incorrectly.
Okay. And who is the landlord? Dad?
It does sound like that.
That would probably be a tough sell. If it's a family that owns the property. However, let's assume that's not the case. So I'll play it out. Again, that all depends on income eligibility. Mm-hmm. Now, in that sense, with VRAP funds running out, I would suggest that they contact us immediately and see if they're income eligible for the program, then see where they get placed on the program. It might be a situation where we could lease up in place. It might be a situation where we have to put them on the list, and it's like you're not going to come up for a voucher for a couple of years. Again, each situation is different, and we would just have to evaluate that situation for what it is.
Right, but it sounds like it's one of those you won't know until you contact and the person provides the information.
Exactly, because everybody's income is different, and the whole program is income based. That's where the criteria is. That's where the decisions are made.
We're rounding the 10-minute before 1 mark. Definitely encourage everybody, and thank you again for attending. Ask any additional questions that you have. As Angela, I'd love to hear any other updates that you or Michael have about anything A to Z Section 8, as well as just what's happening in the legal system. I know it looks like lead regs were updated, all sorts of fun stuff.
Oh, if I jump in here on the lead regs, we do have another program that we're working with Boston Lead on. If a landlord has a unit that's designated as affordable and it has lead in it, there is a city fund that the city will do a loan program. I forget what the exact numbers are, but let's just say, I believe it's a multi-unit house that's up to $20,000 for lead removal. If those units are affordable units, that loan will be forgiven.
Excellent.
In other words, you can get lead taken care of for free as long as you have it's an affordable unit with a Section 8 tenant in it.
See, Michael, I thought you said there was going to be free money today. You said I was wrong, but I think I was right.
Well, let's put this. This isn't free money. We're not going to collect the loan money.
All right, sounds good. A little bit better.
And actually, the money is the city of Burlington money. We just supply the affordable element to it.
And there's also the standalone VHIP program. So the Vermont Housing Investment Program, they keep changing it. So I think it's investment program now. And that is going to have potentially grant money of up to $50,000 per unit with a 20% landlord match for doing rehab to units and then renting those units to affordable at affordable rates. So there's multiple programs that are being launched that can help in these situations.
And that's great, because that actually answered one of our questions. Another one that we had that Brandon relayed via chat, thank you very much, Brandon, is are security deposits part of the guaranteed rent program? Mike, I'm going to assume they're not. From my own history, that would be something of CBEO or something like that.
Right. No, deposits are not part of that. We do not cover deposits, but there are a number like CEVovio who do. So if someone needs deposit money, there are agencies they can go to in town that will do that, but we do not do that.
Excellent.
Yep.
Any additional questions, folks?
I mean, I think there was a question that popped in about programs, fundings available to make updates if they're sort of on the excessive end. And I think, you know, the VHIP program may be one of those that landlords could access for extensive updates or extensive code compliance issues. And those VHIP programs are being run out of the 5 home ownership centers. And so for Chittenden County and the areas up here, that would be out of Champlain Housing Trust. They're the ones administering that program for the state for this region.
Yeah. And Angela, at the end of this, if you wouldn't mind sending out my contact information to folks, because I really, really encourage people, give me a call so I can talk about a lot more in depth about all of this stuff. Get them specific written material so they can really see how the program is going to work for them, or hook them up here with some of our experts, or talking to, for example, some of our inspectors if they have questions about the inspection process. And again, I also want to remind landlords that our inspection process, we're inspecting because we want our people to go in. We're not inspecting to say, bad landlord, you're doing all these things wrong. We're inspecting to say, if you just make these few changes, we can work with you and we really want to.
And are there a huge amount of difference? So if somebody has a property in Burlington that they're currently renting and they're being inspected by Burlington Code Enforcement, they have a certificate of compliance. If they're in compliance with Burlington Code regulations, they're more than likely going to be in compliance with the HQS standards.
Yes. You know, the only difference would be it might have been a year or two since Burlington inspected. So like example, we might say, oh, battery is out on that smoke detector. But I would assume if they have a cert of occupancy that they're going to be very close or pass with flying colors.
And most of the municipalities that you listed off in the Chittenden County area have some form of inspection program. Some are a little more robust than others, but yeah.
Excellent. Michael, really appreciate your time. It's been very informative, and I can't stress enough, folks, I've been a landlord just under 30 years. And the Section 8 tenants, which comprise probably 23% of the buildings or units that I personally own with my stepson, we've overall had great luck for the program. In fact, I have one probably 15-year tenant that makes me, first, really grateful that he served our country. Secondly, that there's a great program like this because he's been a fantastic resident.
Well, and that's a good point, Brian. Thank you. A lot of our folks are veterans. So, you know, if you want to help out our veterans, this is also another way to do it. And thank you, Brian, for having me today. And thank you, Angela. It's been a real pleasure. And again, any questions, in fact, any complaints, and I should have said that earlier, if you've had a problem dealing with anyone here at BHA and you have a complaint, call me. We'll get it taken care of.
So you're only limiting complaints to Section 8, because I get a lot of complaints in life in general. You're not available for those?
Oh, no, I will take care of all complaints. I'll just be charging for those others.
All right, sounds good. Angela, in the few minutes that we have left, anything else that comes to mind, either with the great Section 8 program and Michael, or just general FYIs that we're going to be talking about in the future sessions that we have? And it's great to be back on these.
Yes, I think we are in a process of lining up some great speakers. So keep your eye out in the coming months. I think we're going to have somebody talking to us about short-term rentals and sort of what's happening in the short-term rental market. We're going to potentially be pulling some folks in to talk about this new risk mitigation fund that's almost launched through the state. That's for if there's problems at the back end. And we've got a few others that we're in the process of lining up as well.
Excellent. Folks, I challenge everybody on today, find space in the properties that you own, or if you're managing others, for Section 8, because all our residents of the communities we live in deserve homes to live in. And there's, again, for the most part, I've had great luck with Section 8 residents. I can't stress enough. Thank you again, Michael. My name is Brian Armstrong with KW Vermont Strongwell Real Estate and Property Management. Angela, you serve our investors so very well by helping out with the landlords. And Michael, thanks for all you're doing to bridge the gap between sometimes worlds that don't seem to align so well.
Well, after this, I'm taking on the Ukraine.
Hey, good luck with that. Let me know if—
Thank you. I think I'll keep this job. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And we'll see everybody next month.
Take care, folks.
Take care. Bye-bye.